Pretty interesting and insightful article here by Chris Hedges. So I figured I'd read it and share it with y'all. The Dangerous Fantasy of Hope Rooted in Self-Delusion by Chris Hedges. Came out today. Joe Biden and the systems manager of the deep state and empire are returning to power. Trump and his coterie of buffoons, racist con artists, and Christian fascists are sullenly preparing to leave office. U.S. pharmaceutical corps are starting to disseminate vaccines to mitigate the globe's worst outbreak of COVID-19 that has resulted in more than 2,600 deaths per day. America, as Biden says, is back, ready to take its place at the head of the table. In the battle for the soul of America, he assures us, democracy has prevailed. Progress, prosperity, civility, and a reassertion of American prestige and power we are promised, weeks away. But the real lesson we should learn from the rise of a demagogue such as Trump, who received 74 million votes in a pandemic that our for-profit healthcare industry proved unable to contain, is that we are losing control as a nation, as a species. Completely agree. I don't know how you could argue otherwise. Far more dangerous demagogues will rise from the imperial neoliberal policies the Biden admin will embrace. Far worse pandemics will sweep the globe with higher rates of infection and mortality, an inevitable result of our continued consumption of animals and animal products, and the wanton destruction of the ecosystems on which we and other species depend for life. I believe Chris Hedges, I've heard him say he is a vegan to try to do his part to help out the environment and our climate. One of the most pathetic aspects of human history, Reinhold Niebuhr wrote, is that every civilization expresses itself most pretentiously, compounds its partial and universal values most convincingly, it claims immortality for its finite existence at the very moment when the decay which leads to the death has already begun. I think that's very, very on point for the U.S. empire at this point in time. Biden's appointment drawn almost exclusively from the circles of the Democratic Party, corporate elite, those responsible for the massive social inequality, trade deals, deindustrialization, militarized police, world's largest prison system, austerity programs that abolish social programs such as welfare, the revived Cold War with Russia, wholesale government surveillance, endless wars in the Middle East, and the disenfranchisement and impoverishment of the working class. Washington Post writes that about 80% of the White House and agency officials he announced have the word Obama on their resume from previous White House or Obama campaign jobs. Bernie Sanders, apparently rebuffed in his efforts to become Secretary of Labor in the Biden admin, has expressed frustration with the Biden nominations, but again, you have to be kidding yourself otherwise to think Biden would fill his cabinet with anybody but these corporate imperialist hacks. AOC was denied a seat by House Democrats in the House Energy and Commerce Committee because of her support for the Green New Deal. The message to the Biden admin to progressives and left-wing populists is very clear, drop dead. The list of new admin officials includes retired General Lloyd J. Austin III, who's being nominated to be Secretary of Defense. Austin is on the board of Raytheon Technologies and a partner at Pine Island Capital, a firm that invests in defense industries, and also includes Anthony Blinken, Biden's nominee to be the Secretary of State. Blinken, who is Deputy National Security Advisor and Deputy Secretary of State, is a strong supporter of the apartheid state of Israel. He's one of the architects of the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, and proponent of the overthrow Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, resulting in yet another failed state in the Middle East. U.S./NATO intervention in Libya brought back slavery to that country. And I'm sure, General Lloyd Austin, be Secretary of Defense. I'm sure he's going to be, pushing peace around the globe. I'm sure that would really make his buddies at Raytheon and Pine Island Capital very happy. Janet Yellen, former Federal Reserve Chair under Obama, is slated to be Treasury Secretary. Yellen, as the chair of Bill Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors, and later as a member of the board of the Federal Reserve, backed the repeal of Glass-Steagall, which led to the banking crisis 2008. She supported the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. She also lobbied for a new statistical metric intended to lower payments to senior citizens on Social Security. God damn. I mean, I knew these picks are going to be horrible, but it's the more you learn about them, it's like, no regard for human life, at least of the working class here or abroad. Yellen backed quantitative easing that provided trillions in virtually no interest loans to Wall Street, loans used to bail out banks and corporations and engage in massive stock buybacks while the victims of financial fraud were abandoned. Former Secretary of State John Kerry is to become special envoy for climate. Kerry championed the massive expansion of domestic oil and gas production, largely through fracking, and according to Obama's memoir, worked doggedly to convince those concerned about the climate crisis to, quote, offer up concessions on subsidies for the nuclear power industry and the opening of additional U.S. coastlines to offshore oil drilling. I mean, God, for God's sakes. Avril Haines, a former Obama deputy CIA chief, is to become Biden's director of national intelligence. Haines oversaw Obama's expanded murderous drone program, see 90% civilian death rates, overseas, and backed Gina Haspel's nomination to be head of the CIA, despite Haspel's direct involvement in the CIA torture program carried out in black sites around the globe. Haines called Haspel intelligent, compassionate, fair. Yeah, tell that to the fucking people who were victims of her torture program that was at the CIA, for fuck's sake. Brian Deese, executive who was in charge of the climate portfolio at BlackRock, which invests heavily in fossil fuels, including coal, and who served as a former Obama econ advisor who advocated austerity measures, has been chosen to run the White House economic policy. House's economic policy. Near Tandon, a former aide to Hillary Clinton, has been picked to be director of the Office of Management and Budget. Tandon is the head of the Democratic Party's think tank, the Center for American Progress, raised millions of dark money from Silicon Valley and Wall Street. Her donors include Bain Capital, I think that's associated with Mitt Romney, right? Blackstone, Evercore, Walmart, and the defense contractor Northrop Grumman. United Arab Emirates, a close ally of Saudi Arabia in the war in Yemen, also gave the think tank between 1.5 and 3 million. She relentlessly ridiculed Sanders and his supporters on cable news and social media. She also proposed a plank in the Democratic Party platform for calling for the bombing of Iran. Jesus. Some really horrible picks, but it's to be expected, unfortunately. The perpetuation of the deep and unpopular wars and onerous neoliberal policies by the Biden admin will be accompanied by a fevered demonization of Russia, most recently blamed for cyber attacks. A new Cold War with Russia will be used by the corporate Democrats to discredit domestic and foreign critics and deflect attention from the political stagnation and the corporate pillaging of the country. It will allow MSNBC and the New York Times, which spent 2 years slogging empty Russiagate conspiracies, to disseminate a daily stream of emotionally charged rumors and shady accusations about Russia. Cable celebrities such as Rachel Maddow will hyperventilate night after night about Russia while ignoring the corruption of the Biden admin. Only reason Russia is not blamed for rigging the election in 2020 as opposed to 2016 by the Democratic Party is because Trump was defeated. Completely agree with that. Biden, after his defeat in the Democratic Party caucus in Nevada by Bernie Sanders, where Sanders got more than twice the vote, immediately played the Russia card, telling CNBC News that Russians don't want me to be the nominee. They like Bernie. Hillary Clinton started this dirty game when she attacked 2016 Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein as a Russian asset, and in 2020 leveled the same charge against Rep. Tulsi Gabbard. Democrats need an enemy, real or fictitious, and the Silicon Valley major manufacturers will not allow them to target China. More of the same means more disaster. If we want to reclaim our open society and save the ecosystem, we must abolish the corporate stranglehold on global economic and political power, which to me means we need to get rid of capitalism. If we want to avert zoonotic disease such as COVID-19, swine flu, avian flu, bovine spongiform, and encephalopathy, mad cow disease, Ebola, SARS, we must stop consuming animals and their bodily secretions. We must abolish factory farming, adopt a vegan diet, and we must keep all fossil fuels in the ground. Raising the rainforest for cattle grazing and vast tracts of farmland devoted to growing monocrops to feed animals destined for human consumption are responsible for up to 91% of Amazon rainforest destruction since 1970. Loss of forests is one of the biggest contributors to climate change. Animal agriculture is leading cause of ocean dead zones. Oceans could be devoid of fish by 2048. Each minute, 7 million pounds of feces are produced by the animals raised for human food in the U.S. alone. Continued destruction of natural habitat occupied by the vast factory farms, which use 80% of the antibiotics in the U.S. and incubate drug-resistant pathogens that spread to human populations, presage new forms of the Black Death. The belief that we can maintain current levels of consumption, especially of animal products, capitalist expansion, imperial wars, reliance on fossil fuels, and abject subservience to the unfettered corporate power, which has solidified the worst income inequality in human history, is not a form of hope, but suicidal self-delusion. We're not headed under the policies of the Biden administration and the global ruling elite for the broad, sunlit uplands of a new glorious future, but economic misery, vast climate migrations, waves of new and more virulent pandemics, of which COVID-19 is a mild precursor, along with irreversible ecological system collapse and frightening forms of societal breakdown, authoritarianism, and neo-fascism. Global warming is inevitable. It cannot be stopped. At best, it can be slowed. Over the next 50 years, the Earth will most likely heat up to levels that will make whole parts of the planet uninhabitable. Tens, perhaps hundreds of millions of people will be displaced. Millions of species will go extinct. Cities on or near coast, including New York and London, will be submerged. Oceans absorb much of the excess CO2 and heat from the atmosphere. This absorption is rapidly warming and acidifying ocean waters, resulting in deoxygenation of the oceans. Each of the Earth's 5 known mass extinctions were preceded by at least one part of what climate scientists call the deadly trio: warming, acidification, deoxygenation of the oceans. And it looks like all of that's happening right now. Yay for us. Next mass extinction of sea life is already underway, the first in some 55 million years. This is not defeatism, it is realism. We appear to have bought 4 years of Biden's election, but if we do not use it wisely, and there's nothing in the Biden nominations that offer any encouragement, we're merely reconstructing a shabby Potemkin village that will soon be flattened by the gale-force political and environmental hurricanes that are gathering around us. Wow, he's such a powerful writer. Really just gets to the heart of the issue, and kind of only way that Hedges can. One of the lessons I learned from covering wars and revolutions as a foreign correspondent is that the political, economic, and cultural systems that are erected by any society are very fragile. The facade of power remains in place, as I saw in Eastern Europe during the 1989 revolutions and later in Yugoslavia, long after terminal rot has consumed the foundation. This facade fools society into thinking the structures of authority remain solid, impervious to collapse. So when collapse comes, which should have been long predicted, appears sudden and incomprehensible. The ensuing chaos is disorienting and frightening. The cognitive dissonance between the perception of power and its rapid dissolution feeds self-delusion. It creates, as I witnessed in the former Yugoslavia, what anthropologists call crisis cults, as well as bizarre conspiracy theories, fascism, and the embrace of inchoate violence to purge society of the demons blamed for the national debacle. Hatred becomes the highest form of patriotism. The vulnerable are scapegoated. Intellectuals, journalists, and scientists rooted in fact-based world are despised. Ruling elites and ruling structures lose all credibility. The collapse is often a portal to a world of nihilism and blood-drenched fantasy. After 4 years of lies, the stoking of racist violence, stunning ineptitude, rampant corruption, and abject failure to cope with the national health crisis, Trump expanded his base by 11 million votes. This should be a huge flashing red light. Worse, 70% of Trump's voters, 51 million Americans, believe that radical left Democrats and the deep state rigged the elections through voter fraud, including the importation of Venezuelan voting software, illegitimate mail-in ballots, and the wholesale destruction of Trump's ballots by election officials. 126 Republican House members joined a lawsuit filed by 18 Republican state attorney generals asking the Supreme Court to overturn Biden's victory. The vast majority of Republican senators refused to acknowledge election results following the November vote. Electors from the Electoral College are forced in several states to deliver votes to state legislators under armed guard. Some 24 armed protesters carrying American flags and chanting, "Stop the steal," descended on the home of Democratic Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. 700 members of the white nationalist group, the Proud Boys, took over streets in Washington last weekend to protest the alleged theft of the election, leading to more than 36 arrests, 4 stabbings, and the vandalization of 4 black churches and Black Lives Matter banners and signs ripped down and burned. Trump may be gone soon, but he leaves behind a party that is openly authoritarian, dismissive of democratic norms, enemy to science and fact-based discourse, in which attempted a coup d'etat. The next time around, they won't be so disorganized and inept. The hostility to democracy by one of the 2 ruling parties, supported by millions of Americans, many of whom were betrayed by Biden and the leaders of the Democratic Party, will not dissipate but grow, especially as the hammer of economic dislocation, including the looming evictions of millions of Americans, pummels the country. The decades-long corporate assault on culture, journalism, education, the arts, universities, and critical thinking has left those who speak the truth marginalized and ignored. These Cassandras, locked out of the national debate, are dismissed as unhinged and depressingly apocalyptic. The country is consumed by a mania for hope, which our corporate masters lavishly provide at the expense of truth. It is this delusional hope that will doom us. The Austrian writer Stefan Zweig, who with a handful of other writers and artists desperately tried to warn of the suicidal folly of World War I, wrote of what he called the mental superiority of the defeated. His anti-war play Jeremiah, based on the biblical prophet Jeremiah, who issued warnings in vain, illustrated those who face reality, however bitter, are able to endure and rise above it. "Awaken, doomed city, that thou mayest save thyself," the prophet cries out in Zweig's play. "Awaken from your heavy slumbers, heedless ones. Let you be slain in sleep. Awaken, for the walls are crumbling, and they will crush you. Awaken." But the warnings from Jeremiah, called the weeping prophet, were ignored and ridiculed. He was attacked for demoralizing the people. There were plots against his life. When the Babylonian army captured Jerusalem, Jeremiah, like Julian Assange, was in prison. I was always attracted to showing how any form of power can harden a human being's heart, how victory can bring mental rigidity to whole nations, and to contrasting that with the emotional force of defeat, painfully and terribly plowing through the soul, Zweig wrote in his memoir, The World of Yesterday. In the middle of war, while others celebrating triumph too soon were providing to one another that victory is inevitable, I was plumbing the depths of the catastrophe and looking for a way to emerge with them. Wow. We cannot use the word hope if we refuse to face the truth. All hope rooted in self-delusion is fantasy. We must lift the filter from our eyes to see the danger before us. We must heed the warnings of our own prophets. We must destroy the centers of power that lure us and our children, like the Pied Piper of Hamelin, to certain doom. The walls daily are closing around us. The radical evil we face is as real under Trump as it will be under Biden. Yes, yes. And if this radical evil is not smashed, then the world ahead will be one of torment and mass death. Damn, son. Is that not just fire or what? I'll link it in the description box in case you didn't end up watching this video. If you didn't want to hear my voice for however long it took to read this. It was a fairly long article, but yeah, I mean, it's totally on point. And I feel like a lot of people, especially in corporate media, just want everybody to go back to sleep because their big problem was that Trump was in there. Now we got Trump out. We can just go back to brunch, and how if the Biden administration doesn't actually fight for any of the systemic change that we desperately need in the United States to actually help the working class so more people don't become radicalized and, attach themselves to these right-wing extremist groups, and if we don't address the, climate crisis that we're in, our species doesn't have much longer on this planet, and we don't really, frankly, have a whole lot to be hopeful for at this point in time. And we need to be real about that and figure out how we can force these systems of power to meet our demands. And I think one of the really only ways we can do this is to strike at the heart of capitalism. And I'm not the first one to come up with this idea. I heard it from Boots Riley, and organizing a general strike across the U.S. across multiple sectors. Let's say we shut down all the ports on both coasts for a couple of weeks. I think it would be hard to argue if we were able to do that we wouldn't be able to get something like Medicare for all passed, canceling student loan debt, redistributing the wealth of billionaires, an eco-socialist Green New Deal, etc. But definitely a lot of work to do. And it's a really important point, the dangerous fantasy of hope rooted in self-delusion, because we like to, delude ourselves. Like things are okay. Trump's out of office. He was this huge threat, realizing that, Biden is stacking his cabinet with a lot of the same people who want to carry out a lot of the same policies that, the Trump administration were also in support of, and how the Democratic Party, Hedges points out, completely has abandoned its commitment to actually fight for the working class. And again, what is there to be hopeful about at this point in time? And it's like Hedges says, this is him, I don't fight fascists because I think I'll win. I fight fascists because they are fascists. And we need to, I think, get a little bit more real with the stakes of this current moment in time that we're living in, and the ecological crisis, the economic crisis, and like really, really heavy shit we need to come to terms with and not be so delusional and hopeful until we actually have things to be hopeful for. It's my thoughts anyways. Always appreciate Hedges' analysis because he's just so clear on what the stakes are, and he doesn't engage in that self-delusion. And he's vegan too, so that makes me like him even better. Share your thoughts down there. Like it if you like it. If not that, subscribe for more content. Peace. Much love.